You're not getting it ever, but I love you.
Will do it?
No, hell no.
Will you like sing us a ballad or something? I didn't know you had a singing scholarship at NYU. I mean, we got to showcase this.
This is my worst nightmare. Right before the show goes hot, too.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo NFL Strategy Show Marathon Matchups Edition for Week 3. Season's moving quick already. I'm Dave Loughran at Laffy_D on the Twitters. Hit your boy up and say what's up to Matt Savoca at Draftaholic over on Twitter. I feel like it should be at Singaholic. This man just tells Jordan Klein, producing today's show, and myself, Jordan's losing his shit over there, that he had a scholarship to NYU for singing, and you won't showcase it right now on the show to kind of serenade and set us off.
No, it has to happen organically. Like now that you know that that's in the bag of tricks, then it just has to, it'll come out at some point, just like it came out as information at some point in the matchups show history. You'll get it. I promise.
If I knew this for week 1, to know that you could have serenaded our maiden voyage for the 2021 season, that would have been, just spectacular.
Yeah. Now we've built it up. It's going to be a whole thing when it happens, but yeah, I'm excited. I'm glad you guys know.
But you're legitimately good though. I mean, if you got a scholarship, you got some pipes.
I suppose a couple people thought so, enough to give my family some cash, right?
Kevin Voigt says, Matt, sing your picks.
Sing all the picks.
Dude,
have you ever
amazing.
Total tangent, but have you ever changed your GPS settings on your phone? I think it's Google Maps. There's like a boy band setting and it'll sing you your directions. It's really torture, but that's what we're talking about here. Yeah. So it's out there if you really
I didn't know that. That sounds awful.
Directions. Yeah.
Mine's a Australian accent, a female Australian accent.
Okay.
So like if we're doing shows and my phone is closed and a text comes through, it'll start reading it through my ears and I have to scramble to turn it off because it's really, really, it's really distracting. But one day, Matt, like Jordan said, maybe when we do a live after lock show on the Awesemo Odds channel, right? On the Awesemo Odds channel where we watch the game, you can sing the Star Spangled. You can sing the national anthem.
Sing the national anthem.
I'll stand. I'll take my hat off. Absolutely, man.
Unbelievable. That's great.
All right. Anyway, we got a lot to talk about. 13 games to break down today. As I always say, I mean, if you're coming here and this is your first prep for the week, well, you're in the right spot. We're going to hit on everything necessary. and get you ready. Now, of course, we had the first look show on Tuesday. We had the ownership and top stack show yesterday. We had the lineup builder show tomorrow, the final look on Saturday, everything culminating into a 4-hour live stream on Sunday. So hopefully you'll join us for all of that. But if you're just here for this, well, we're happy to have you with us. Hammer that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If we get to 300 likes, Matt will sing us out. I'm just kidding. We won't get there live. We'll get there for sure, but not live. So you're
look
safe.
at the can of worms we have opened. Oh man,
dude. Okay, last thing. I promise. Last thing on this, and then we'll get into Washington Buffalo, right? But yeah, for real, hit that thumbs up and subscribe. Love you guys. It would be so sick, Jordan. Instead of playing an intro beat, like while the mics are hot, right? Yeah, and while the countdown timer's on, to just have Matt do like 2 minutes of his favorite song a cappella. No?
I mean, what are you paying? I guess is the answer.
Compliments.
Okay. All right. We'll think about it.
I'll pay you in compliments. All right, Matt. Washington and Buffalo. Let's get down into the nitty gritty, fellas. Washington football team, 7.5-point dogs against the Buffalo Bills, 45.5-point total. First thing I'll ask you, I'll keep it very simple. We saw Washington just superlatives rain down upon this defense all off season, right? And I'm not saying they're bad. I still think they're an above average defense, but is it possible that we may have jumped the gun on just how elite this defense was going to be? And now they're 7.5-point dogs against the Bills.
Yeah, it's very possible. I mean, if you do longitudinal studies with defenses and most metrics, and you look at the top teams in the league at the end of one season, and then you see how they finish the next season, in general, they move towards the average. Now, what we don't see is a defense that was elite move towards the absolute bottom tier of defenses. But in general, we see great defenses trend towards the mean in efficiency and ability. I'm not saying the Washington defense is suddenly bad. I'm saying I'm not sure we need to adjust all of our rankings and projections based on this defense going forward. Now, the talent is still there. Chase Young is still an effective talent. But if you look at overall defensive PFF grades, they're really kind of unimpressive. 22nd in the league, tied with the Colts, another underwhelming defense, and the Ravens, also underwhelming. So the Giants were able to move the ball. Daniel Jones was able to rush all over them. And going forward, I mean, we haven't seen the Bills hit a ceiling week. I'm not saying it's happening here, but I'm saying it's not out of the question at all.
Is whelmed a word that you would use if you were to say a team has been satisfactory?
Yeah, you're just slightly whelmed.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
But have you ever heard anybody say that?
No, I haven't.
There's overwhelmed. There's underwhelmed. Where's Whelm's role in all of this?
Yeah. How dare we leave it out, honestly?
That's what I'm saying. Like I've been pretty whelmed by the Eagles defense thus far.
Okay. Yeah. They've been right about average. They're whelming.
Yeah. I'm making that a thing. So do you like Washington offensively against Buffalo, where you've got Gibson and McLaurin, who did a number on Bradbury, and he's the type of weapon that can be used pretty much everywhere? Or is this for you as big dogs with Taylor Heineke in Buffalo kind of a stay away spot on such a big slate?
Hey, I'm glad you said that, because the most important and impressive part of that week 2 win for the Washington football team, which they basically stole from the Giants there, was the fact that Terry McLaurin was able to get open all the time against James Bradbury, who had just covered up Cortland Sutton a week earlier. Now, McLaurin and Sutton, they're very different types of receivers. McLaurin relying on agility and shiftiness to get open, create separation, and Heineke was able to get him plenty of looks in this offense. So what's really exciting is we don't have to downgrade the overall offensive projections for the Washington football team going forward. At least we don't think. We were already building in plenty of variance for this offense week to week with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the helm. So if we see some up and down offensive weeks, we shouldn't be necessarily surprised. I don't see it as a must-play spot this week, but in general, I do think we could have a possibility where Buffalo scores a bunch early, finally getting in a rhythm offensively, and we could see Taylor Heineke be a little bit more impressive than that QB 17 overall salary on DraftKings. Right now, the Awesemo projections have him right in line, slightly below his salary-based expectations. So that just solidifies that it's not a go-to spot or anything like that.
Yeah, and as far as Gibson and McKissick goes, I mean, again, small sample size sport, particularly after only 2 weeks. Gibson went from seeing 5 targets in week 1. McKissick only ran like 4 routes to Gibson in week 2, not really being featured in the passing game at all, while J.D. McKissick saw 6 targets and was highly effective as a pass catcher. So again, in this specific matchup, I just don't really feel like I want to target the run game. And man, there's so many good mid-range running backs out there this week.
Right. And, this is exactly what we were talking about in the preseason when we were trying to examine Antonio Gibson's expected workload, where, we're seeing exactly what we were concerned about. He has 13.5 expected fantasy points per game. That's good enough for 15th among running backs on the slate right now. That's not so bad. But J.D. McKissick at 7 expected fantasy points and more in week 2 than he had in week 1. Those 7 points, or even a large majority, like 50% of those 7 points, that's what's stopping Antonio Gibson from getting a bell cow level workload that really just makes him a tournament play only. You can't rely on him in cash, especially in weeks where they're a huge underdog. If anything, I'm looking at the passing game and saying, oh, maybe they overperform by a touchdown here, even in a losing effort. Sure, they could pass one in, but even more of a reason to be concerned about Gibson because he wasn't getting those receiving looks in the backfield.
All right. Buffalo and specifically Stefon Diggs here is always a hot topic of conversation because the guy just has a high floor. Is he busting off those huge games every week like we saw from, Devontae Adams? Not every week, but you know what I mean? No, not necessarily. But the volume of targets is going to be there for sure. Washington's secondary has been, again, I don't know, whelming, but they haven't been great, Matt. And I think when you look at someone like Stefon Diggs in a spot like this, my first thought was, what's his ownership going to be when you've got the Tampa Bay and the Rams game? Tampa Bay Rams. You have a bunch of other really, really favorable spots when it comes to wide receivers. Diggs is coming in at 11.6% on DraftKings, though, so he's certainly not going overlooked. And I think a lot of that has to do with his salary is still in a spot where even in some tough matchups, it's not that hard to get to him.
Yeah, exactly. And, his expected fantasy points is right in line with his salary-based expectation. So even though, yes, like you said, we haven't seen those big blow-up performances, we did see him get in the end zone last week. Sort of a cerebral play. He actually fell down and Allen knew he was going to pop back up and he threw it while he was on the ground. Really impressive sort of communication between quarterback and wide receiver. And there's no question who that number 1 option is. There really has been an underwhelming performance so far from the rest of the Bills receivers. We saw in the running game a little bit of burst from Devin Singletary, but still, we're looking at Stefon Diggs as a player who has a top 5 expected fantasy points at his position, and I am not scared by that 11.6% ownership. I expect to be over the field on that. It's not a huge shootout probability, but in the case that it does happen, because of these other games, these high total games, there aren't going to be a lot of people with me. So I think the Allen Diggs stack is still completely viable in tournaments.
No doubt. And I actually love that as just a skinny stack, right? Because Josh Allen can do so much with his legs anyway. So if you ran into a situation or a game where, Allen rushes one in, but also throws for 300 yards, but only 2 touchdowns, and both of them go to Diggs, or even one goes to Diggs and he's got 150 yards. There's a lot of ways for just a stack like that to pay off in a big way because Allen has that dual threat ability. The run game is one that I honestly want nothing to do with, Matt. I mean, I know Singletary's efficient. He's almost a 5 yards per attempt guy for his career, but Zach Moss came in, scored from the 7-yard line and the 1-yard line. Josh Allen is still, the co-goal line back. And Singletary's good, but again, just like last week, if he's going to produce, he needs to break a big touchdown run. And I just really don't feel like trying to figure out what that's going to be. Didn't you and I look this up? And it's like he has a 1% touchdown percentage on all of his career carries. Wasn't that you and me the other week?
Yeah. We looked that up, and it compared to Josh Allen, it's like orders of magnitude lower. Yeah. And that's super tough to get to. And we can go one step further with exactly what you're saying. What does he need to do to have a tournament winning score where you sort of had to have him in your lineup? It means multiple breakaway touchdowns. And Singletary is an efficient running back, as you said. 1.1 fantasy points over expectation per game. That's 15th among all running backs on the slate. That's not bad. But in order to break the slate, if you will, we're talking multiple versions of that 46-yard touchdown we saw in week 2. I just don't think that's a high probability event.
I'm with you. And I don't want Zach Moss. I don't want a guy that just has the vulture touchdowns either. I mean, I'm not interested. Are you? Quickly, anybody else on this Buffalo team in the passing game, Manny Sanders or anyone that you want to touch on?
I certainly hope that ceiling games are in this offense's future and therefore blow up games from some auxiliary weapon at some point. Once again, in full PPR leagues, we're seeing Cole Beasley as a projected value in terms of opportunity compared to salary, 25th in expected fantasy points while 40th in salary. Again, it's sort of a situation where in tournaments, especially, we need a touchdown and 10 receptions. It's possible at some point, maybe they're blanketing Diggs, the Washington defenses. But I'll tell you who has been a big disappointment so far is Emmanuel Sanders. Yes, the projected fantasy points compared to salary look good, but I think he needs multiple scores, and he's got an expected fantasy points outside the top 40 wide receivers. He's not a great bet. For sure.
Yeah, and you're talking about expected fantasy points. Josh Allen is like, what is he? 8 expected fantasy points above. I think I don't know where you get yours from, but I'm looking at PFF now, and his expected fantasy points are absurd because you're not going to get all of these games where the running backs are would they have 3 rushing touchdowns from running backs last week? That is not going to be commonplace for the Buffalo Bills at all.
Yeah, when you look at the volume of passes, the air yards on those passes, and then the fact that Josh Allen has a high percentage of the inside the 5-yard line touches, it's Josh Allen getting all those expected fantasy points for the Bills.
Chicago Bears, Cleveland Browns. All right. Another touchdown spread, Matt. Cleveland laying 7 at home, 45.5 total. Here we got what everyone was looking for, right? Fields is going to be starting this week with Andy Dalton still sidelined. He struggled last week, but there were some spots where it could have been better had his pass catchers not kind of let him down. But 6 of 13, 60 yards, no touchdowns, an interception. He did run 10 times for 31 yards, though, and that's kind of where this dual threat ability comes in, turns you into a cheat code. But is this a week to take some shots on Fields because he's so cheap, or do you just think there's better options?
In tournaments, yes, take some shots on Fields. The Cleveland Browns defense has not been impressive. We saw that Tyrod Taylor basically waltzed into the end zone. And of course, the Kansas City Chiefs were able to do whatever the Kansas City Chiefs wanted to do against this Cleveland Browns defense. So I think it's possible that we see a ceiling game from Justin Fields here. Is it the most probable thing? No, but we're talking about a player who very easily, by season's end, we could imagine him having a salary much higher than 5,200 on DraftKings. That's 22nd among quarterbacks. And we want to be a part of those games that get him up to that next tier of salary. You already mentioned it. The rushing ability of Fields, he is incredibly fast. And you could also call him a pass-first quarterback that is incredibly fast. That is basically the highest upside type of player we want in fantasy football. Will there be growing pains? Will there probably be turnover plays? Most likely, yes. But with the rushing floor and ceiling, and the fact that he almost got a bomb touchdown to Allen Robinson, it fell out of Robinson's hands,
which is so uncharacteristic of Allen
that would have
Robinson.
changed. I know. That would have changed the perception of Fields opening half as a starter so entirely that I think it would have changed his ownership. Right now, we're seeing him just inside the top 12 quarterbacks. I think people don't realize that there is 30-point fantasy potential against a bad defense here. Again, not the most probabilistic thing. His projection on Awesemo.com is right in line with salary. But the ceiling here compared to the other people in his tier is really different.
I'm with you 100%. And let me say, Allen Robinson has a 2% drop rate since 2019. Like that is such, I'm a big Allen Robinson fan. I just love what he's done with bad quarterbacks his whole career. Watch he finally gets a good one and just starts to stink.
Oh, or God. Darnell Mooney gets like 40% of the target share. Not to say that Mooney's a bad play, but
I hope not. But hey, Football Outsiders has Cleveland's defense at 31st in DVOA coverage, past DVOA. PFF graded them as like a bottom 8 pass coverage team right now. And I know they face Kansas City, but you're looking at this not just from the matchup standpoint. They were getting carved up quite a bit by Tyrod Taylor last week before he went down at the end of the first half. So I don't look at this as the most daunting matchup at all for Justin Fields. What does that do for his pass catchers for you? We know he has dual threat ability, but we also know, as you put it, he has been a fat pass first quarterback, and actually in college, a very accurate quarterback as well. Can we go to Robinson here? Can we go to Mooney? Can we look at like a large field punt with Cole Kmet? What are your thoughts?
Well, history says that we need to be very wary with a rookie quarterback's pass catchers. Even target hogs like Allen Robinson in the past tend to trend down in their volume with rookies because rookies are often dumping off the ball just a little bit more, checking down a little bit more, and rushing a little bit more, which we already outlined as possibilities for Fields. That said, we're talking about a top 15 talent in Allen Robinson. So I'm not generally afraid of going to a great player against a bad defense when we know the quarterback play should be about the same or better than what he was already experiencing. But there is going to be some fluctuation, some volatility with this passing game. So that makes Robinson and then Mooney and Kmet, they become thinner plays. And looking at the projections this week, they're basically in line with salary-based expectations. That doesn't make them bad plays, but it probably just makes them tournament plays. No clear values here. So if anyone, you're going to just Fields alone is viable, first of all, we should say, because you could just play a ceiling game where he gets to the ceiling via rushing. But I don't mind doing a skinny stack if we're talking about large field tournaments.
For sure. Yeah. And Mooney's not that expensive either. Neither is Robinson, but I'm not looking to full stack this team, at least not now. With Cleveland, we saw Nick Chubb with, another one of those games where he gets into the end zone, which he's just so good at doing. The volume sucks. It's not fun, but he's so consistent. It's just, again, at this price point, he's giving you those numbers, but the volume scares me on a week where, while these guys below him aren't as talented as Nick Chubb, and you guys know how I feel about Chubb, they're probably going to see some of them potentially double the workload. And, I think that's got me off of him this week, unless you want to change my mind. Where are you at on Cleveland with Odell returning? And of course, Jarvis Landry heading to the IR.
Yeah, it's not insignificant that Jarvis Landry is on IR. And we run into this problem almost every week with Nick Chubb, where we look at the talent of the player and we say, that might be the best rusher in the NFL. Derrick Henry might have something to say about that, but plus 8.3 fantasy points over expectation per game. Unsurprisingly, that's number one in the NFL. That's Nick Chubb's current efficiency. But like you said, when you talk about what types of touches he's typically getting, they're not that valuable. It's basically him using his ability and that quality offensive line to the best of its abilities. That's really hard to play when fantasy football, we know to bet on volume first and foremost. 12.1 expected fantasy points, 23rd amongst running backs in the NFL, or in this main slate, I should say. And he's 4th in salary on DraftKings. That's what makes him tough. I don't see this, as always with Chubb, I don't see it as a must play, but if you want to pivot to him because he's at lower ownership compared to a lot of other players around him in projection, I completely understand that. The Bears defense is, should we say whelming? Should they say whelming again?
I'd say relatively
they
whelming.
Have been,
sure.
They'd be 5th. They are 5th in yards per carry allowed over the first 2 weeks of the season. Again, a small sample, but over the first 2 weeks, they have been a high quality rushing defense.
It's crazy with Chubb because, like, I bet it. Look up last year. What were his expected fantasy points about? What is it? Fantasy points above expectation.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
I
bet it was just as high.
I bet he was towards the top every year because he's that efficient. Which is why he's an anomaly, right? Like, I don't want to play him this week.
100%.
I think he's a little bit too expensive. But he's one of those anomalous players where if he does it long enough, you're like, okay. Like Derrick Henry's a good example too of a guy that doesn't catch a ton of passes, but gets a ton of volume. Nick Chubb is the one guy in the league that can do it on 13 carries. It's just when he doesn't do it, Matt, and he doesn't score, you're getting like 7-8 fantasy points from him. And that's what kills you at that price point. That's why I'm not particularly enthusiastic about him this week.
Third, he was, third amongst running backs, fourth overall behind Alvin Kamara, Devontae Adams, and Christian McCaffrey.
Wow. And McCaffrey doesn't really count. He only played 2 games, but yeah. That's crazy. Do you have interest in the passing game this week? For me, it's like Odell Beckham's coming back, but he was supposed to play week 1, then he was supposed to play week 2, hasn't played any of them. My assumption is even though he's a full go, does he get a full workload? I have some concerns there. And then Peoples-Jones, it's like, all right, yeah, the guy's on the field for every snap. He just never gets Baker to look his way. And then Schwartz, I have no faith in. I had the tight end position is kind of a rotational mess. Like, I don't know. I'm just not enamored with these pass catching options this week.
Yeah, the Browns are one of these offenses that we think is going to be one of the better offenses in terms of efficiency, but going to them in the passing game is not going to feel good really any week. Now, I do think that there is a possibility that Beckham was basically protected from himself and that now in week 3, he's much healthier than he would have been 2 weeks if he had played 2 weeks ago. And because of Landry being on IR, we see a player who is by far the best receiving option on his team. And he just gets peppered with targets. You know, Baker might only throw 23 times, but 9 of those targets are to Beckham. That's a possibility. And so a player, I don't know, maybe I'm living in 2014 too much, but a player at 31st in salary with 1.2% expected ownership, that's outside the top 50 wide receivers, and that I know has a history of 30-point performances, I don't think that's the worst bet. I'd rather bet on Beckham when nobody is playing him than Beckham when everybody is playing him.
Yeah. And the one thing I like about this, you're right. If he is healthy enough, Baker Mayfield, this doesn't get talked about enough. Baker Mayfield has targeted him frequently downfield. And those are the type of big plays you're looking for, especially with a low owned player. So I don't think it's crazy, Matt. I think we both agree though. The floor here is very low. This is a large field tournament play that could pay off because Beckham, when healthy, is still a very good wide receiver.
I like to believe so. It's a tournament play for sure, but playing Browns pass catchers is not something you should be prioritizing for cash. So I hope everyone knew that already.
Right. Well, I was saying larger field, like I don't think.
Yeah, no, totally. No, I just want to make sure we're everyone's contextualizing why we're talking about these players.
For sure. All right. Indy, Tennessee, and we'll speed it up a little bit. Make sure we get everyone out of here in a reasonable time. The Indianapolis, it's just fun talking football. It's just a good time.
Yeah.
Indianapolis against Tennessee. Jacob Eason takes the reins under center for the Indianapolis Colts, and this should be fun. They're only 5-point dogs, 48.5 point total. I was so excited for that Pittman game. I've been on the Pittman hype train all year. Love this guy. Huge game receiving, and then boom, Carson Wentz manages to sprain not 1 but 2 ankles, and now we've got a guy who's played 5 career snaps at the NFL level, all of which came last week. Granted, Matt, very difficult matchup, thrusting him into action, cold off the bench, like expecting any heroics against that Rams secondary would have been, would have been I can't think of the word, but
yeah, it was a very tough start to an NFL career to go against have Aaron Donald breathing down your neck every play.
No doubt. But I still don't have much faith in him this week. And I'll be honest, I'm not excited about anybody from the Colts. Jonathan Taylor leads the league in goal line carries, but I don't know how the hell I don't know if he's going to get any this week.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. So when we talk about expected fantasy points for running backs, it's very much related to the offensive ability to get towards the goal line, to score points, because without that, they need a huge amount of receiving workload to be valuable, at least on a volume level. So Jonathan Taylor, so far this year, number 2 at his position in expected fantasy points, and the efficiency has been a totally different story. It's really because of those goal line carries that he has not converted, but he's at minus 8.5 fantasy points under expectation per game. So it's really hard to look at Jonathan Taylor as anything but an off-the-wall tournament play. We haven't really, I don't think, updated our ownership projections and our overall player projections for this Colts team with the news that Wentz likely is going to miss, but we have to presume a giant dock to all of their projections. I'm not going to any of these pass catchers, and I'm just, even if I'm playing Tennessee players, might not even be doing a run back option.
I'm with you. I will say, I was surprised to see that the Titans had a 22-point implied total, or the Colts, sorry. The Colts had a 22-point implied total. I thought it would be lower than that. I really did, but it's not. I don't know.
I guess that speaks to the implied quality of the coach and the scheme.
I was just going to say that. Yep.
Rather than Wentz.
Was absolutely going to say the same thing. Yep. But still, it's a downgrade. I'm happy to get away from it. There's so many good spots this week, Matt. And Tennessee's interesting to me because you talked about Indy's defensive woes early on. Again, they face Seattle and LA, but a lot of what you're looking at in terms of grading defenses is going to take that into consideration. I just think guys like AJ Brown are going to get slept on in a lot of weeks because he hasn't been great, but he has been targeted a ton. He tweeted something hilarious the other day. He's like, all my family and friends told me after the game that I couldn't have caught COVID on Sunday if I tried. But, I mean, it's just the self-deprecating humor. You got to appreciate it. But I think he's probably going to get some ownership this week. And where's he at? I think he is. He's around 10%. Nothing crazy. Julio Jones proving last week that the guy definitely still has it. And I think they should have given him that touchdown in the back of the end zone. But let's actually start with the Pat. Right? How do you overturn that?
I have no idea.
No, it was a beautiful catch too. I don't know. What do you think of the pass catchers here?
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed that there's so much ownership coalescing around this game, but I completely understand it. When I started looking at the slate this week, at first I thought, oh, wow, it's not even point chasing to just go back to the well at Derrick Henry. And I'm not fully convinced that first thought about this game is wrong here. Indianapolis, I know it's a 2-game sample size, but right now they rank 30th in yards per. Actually, I'm looking at this wrong. They're middle of the road, 17th in yards per carry allowed. But I just figured because of the game script, you would get a second half where Derrick Henry might see 30 or at least 25 total touches here. And the fact that he's suddenly getting a receiving workload. 2 of his largest target games of his career have happened in 2021 so far.
That's crazy.
But that is a whole digression to say the Indianapolis pass defense has been a problem over the first 2 weeks. They are 30th. This is what I meant to say, in yards per pass attempt allowed. And they're well below average, 26th in points per play allowed. So talk about an offense that can get explosive plays from their 3 main playmakers, and a defense that is giving up just that, a large amount of plays, and per play yardage is very high. I can't get away from the Titans this week.
I'm with you. Well said, Matt. Yeah, I just can't stop thinking that if Derrick Henry, and I know they don't necessarily want to utilize him a ton as a pass catcher, but he's actually not a bad pass catcher is the thing. He may not be elite, but he's not bad. Could you imagine if this guy averaged 4 targets per game and was actually on the field running routes when he's not getting carries? It would be shocking. So
it would be great. It would be back to the days of having David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell on the slate, where they were essentially getting that they had the touchdown breaking upside that they could just break one tackle and be gone. But the receiving floor helped us play them no matter what their salary was back in the day.
It's crazy. The Lions are so bad in pass coverage that they kind of break the rankings because they're allowing a 148 passer rating this year. But the Colts are second worst with a 132 passer rating allowed. They've allowed 7 receptions already of 20 plus yards and 3 receptions already of 40 plus yards. So, I mean, my God, dude, this team's been getting slaughtered, not just in the passing game, but deep downfield as well. As you mentioned, 10 yards per attempt. Ooh.
Yeah. How about this too? Julio Jones was clocked in that deep catch that he had in week 2. He was clocked as one of the 10 fastest carriers of the ball. As he received the ball, he was right around 21 miles per hour, something only 10 players did last week.
Does it not kind of put a smile on your face to see everyone that said Julio Jones was washed and had nothing left and would be slow and decrepit do what he did last week and should have had a touchdown? Makes me happy.
Awesome.
It is. It's awesome. But yeah, I thought AJ Brown would be a little bit lesser owned, but I'll tell you this much. You know how everyone last week, not everybody, but it's like, well, if Lockett did it in 1 week, then Metcalf does it, then Lockett does it. Well, Julio did it last week, and now he's projected for 2% ownership. He's the same price as AJ Brown. So if you want to get different in tournaments, and if AJ Brown's ownership keeps rising, I don't think Julio is the craziest idea. Like, if you are of the belief of Matt and myself that Julio is still good, and I think last week erased any question of whether or not he was. Week 1, Tannehill could not get the ball out. Then I'll sprinkle in a little 2% Julio and feel decent about it against this Colts defense. But yeah, Matt, look, Derrick Henry, AJ Brown, Julio Jones, mega concentrated offense. I don't think we're ever going to be in a spot against the Colts where you're just like, no, don't touch any of these guys. That's all.
Yeah, and they are beat up right now. They could get healthier at some point down the road. So they technically have the ability to improve. We could see a little bit of reversion to the mean, but I'm not expecting it here.
Wow. Trey Sermon's expected to play on Sunday. I thought he was dead.
I mean, I have no idea what to think about with this San Francisco backfield. Jacques Patrick, I'm ready.
Yeah. It's so bad. All right. Atlanta and New York. Whew. Dude, Atlanta's defense, it's rough. But also, they gave up 2 pick sixes, right? Fluky pick sixes in that game as well. They're not good, but they're 3-point dogs. Do you think, and I'm honestly not leading this question one way or the other, do you think this game has shootout potential?
I think it does. I think the Giants are one of those teams that are not completely inept offensively, playing a completely inept defense. And then there's the possibility that the Arthur Smith offense finally gets on a roll here. We have some probable more concentrated offense on that side of the ball with Russell Gage likely to miss this week. I think there is some sneaky shootout potential, particularly on the Giants side of the ball. If you run any sort of optimizers, you're definitely going to get some Giants popping into your lineups because the value there is just so solid. As you mentioned, the Atlanta defense, it's definitely on the current list of terrible defenses that we're looking to exploit in DFS. They currently rank 30th in yards per carry allowed, 20th in yards per pass attempts allowed, and they are bottom 31st in points per play allowed. So just not the defense may have, or the offense may have been just throwing the ball away last week, but that defense is just as horrible. I think Daniel Jones is a sneaky good play this week because of his rushing ability. The Awesemo projection actually has him in the top 10 quarterbacks in projected fantasy points. He's 13th in salary. I think there's some ceiling probability there. He's getting a little bit of ownership, 6.7%, but that certainly doesn't scare me away. His expected fantasy points, again, because of that rushing, really impressive, 21.3 fantasy points. That's 8th among all quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's been wildly impressive. And we've seen him flash that before. This isn't exactly anything, totally new, right? We've actually seen Daniel Jones.
He's fast. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. I mean, he tripped over his own feet against the Eagles, but the guy still got some wheels on him. Here, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Saquon Barkley in week 1 played 40. I'm going off the top of my head, 48% of snaps. And then in week 2, I think he played 78%. Let me just make sure. 84%. Right. And touched the ball 15 times, had 16 looks. That was on 3 days rest. Now he's on 9 days rest. Okay. Coming off an ACL, probably fresh as he's been all season. Do we run into a situation where Giants slight field goal favorites? They've made some minor tweaks to their offensive line that seem to be at least moderately effective, at least better than we've won. Do we see Saquon Barkley's heavier involvement potentially in the run game and in the short pass game take away some of that rushing upside from Daniel Jones on a weekly basis?
Sure. I actually view it the other way, that Daniel Jones rushing upside really takes away from Saquon Barkley's the other way around. And I see the smash potential for Saquon in this spot. Absolutely. We just rattled off all these terrible defensive stats, particularly in the run game for Atlanta. The one problem here is that you're not going to be alone with this pick of Saquon Barkley, especially if you play him in tournaments. So what do I really gain, even if he goes off? I totally see his path to success here. And his price point is just fantastic. I mean, 6,500 for a player like Barkley is just unheard of. But let's just call it like it is. -7 fantasy points below expectation per game. That's outside the top 60 running backs. That's not a place we typically see Saquon Barkley. And so, yes, it was good to see him juke out a couple defenders, finally break off a 46-yard run. But we need big plays from him and multiple of them for this to sort of turn around. Could it happen? Could he have this get right game against Atlanta? Yes. But just remember, you're going to have to do something different with the rest of your lineup because a lot of people are assuming that could happen too.
No doubt. And I said this on yesterday's show that we have Barkley at 11% on DraftKings right now. I feel like that probably comes up significantly.
Yeah, if you run an optimizer too, it's just one of the running backs that continually pops up as a value play over and over and over.
And
again.
he should.
Sure. Yeah, I understand it. But the downside here is you play him in an obvious spot, and he hasn't yet in this offense been efficient. We haven't seen it yet. So it is a little bit of speculative pick.
No, I'm with you entirely here. No doubt about it. I'm with you. My question was more so, does it, kind of cannibalize some of that Daniel Jones production? But no, listen, Saquon Barkley, I think is a must in cash. I think you have to play Barkley in cash this week. But if you're getting away from him and he ends up being very popular, it really does feel like one of the best spots to pivot away from. And maybe I'm misled here, but only because there is so much uncertainty and just volatility on this backfield and Saquon Barkley coming off an injury, and the uncertainty that, does his role increase dramatically? I think I could make some very good points as to why it will, and I just did, but that's all speculation. So if we're just speculating on that, then yes, Saquon Barkley could be underwhelming. What about Shepard and Golladay in this in the passing game? And of course, it looks like we should have Evan Ingram back this week as well.
Yeah, I think from a game theory perspective, I'm much more interested in the Giants passing attack than I thought I would be, even heading into this week, understanding that Atlanta just got torched through the air. I was surprised to see the ownership projections for all these players are really reduced. The Buccaneers, I guess they are a specific case with Tom Brady at the helm. They just passed all over this Atlanta offense, wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted, at the goal line, at the 1 yard line. I get it. The Giants passing offense is not by any means the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. But now you're talking about Sterling Shepard, who is coming in at 4% ownership. He's 15th on the slate amongst wide receivers in expected fantasy points, and he's been incredibly efficient, top 10 at his position. Kenny Golladay, yes, I know, has been really disappointing for anyone who's rostered him or anyone who has him in season-long fantasy drafts. But the expected fantasy points are right in line with salary-based expectation. If we see a little bit more volume, I think we could easily see this be the efficiency boost or turnaround day for Golladay. And Slayton is the big play guy. So in large field tournaments, I don't think Slayton is a bad play at all, especially at 2% ownership outside the top 40 wide receivers. He's a type of player who I only need 3 or so receptions from, and I could easily have a huge score that no one else in the field rostered.
Slayton should have had 2 long touchdowns last week.
Yeah. And this is one of the great reasons why I use metrics and even PFF grades, because when I was watching the game in week 2, I was like, Daniel Jones just cannot pass deep. He's always missing people deep. And then I go to PFF, and he's been graded as one of the highest graded deep passers, 20 plus air yards downfield over the last 2 seasons. So I think there's a little bit to blame on Jones, sure, but his receivers just need to catch the ball.
I agree. He's attempted 5 deep balls this year, completed 2 of them for 75 total yards and a touchdown. Darius Slayton has 3 of those 5 targets, the only 2 receptions, and the only yards that Daniel Jones has actually converted from deep ball, and the only touchdown, obviously. So look, very early in the season, but your point stands that Slayton, even after that drop, I still think will get a couple shots. Again, pure boom bust.
And let me
play.
say one last thing about this offense too. I think people need to realize that we've talked about Daniel Jones, the rusher. There is more overlap between this offensive playbook on the Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles and the Baltimore Ravens than people think, with the read option and the pistol formation. And so I just want to say that there is a possibility that this offense figures it out, and Atlanta's defense is a really good place to do it.
For sure. We didn't really hit on Atlanta. I'll let you run through this quickly, and then we'll go to the Chargers Kansas City game, which is going to be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, super disappointing to see Calvin Ridley so low in expected fantasy points. 9th, we expected him to be literally 1st at this point in the season. But with Russell Gage out, yes, we could probably see project a little bit more in terms
Gage
of
hasn't done shit, though.
I know.
I mean, my Lord.
It's been a mess for this new offense, and people who are saying that the Arthur Smith infusion of his offensive mentality was going to take away the pass volume from Matt Ryan have been largely correct. He's 13 in expected fantasy points. Usually with volume alone, we see him up in the top 10. Mike Davis is now in a full-blown timeshare. I will say the projections look really rosy compared to his salary-based expectations. At 5,100, you could do worse in tournaments, but you're not going to be alone. Over 10% expected ownership right now. That's top 10 on the slate, or amongst running backs at least. But overall, this whole offense has been a disappointment. And until we see some actual efficiency, some actual production, I don't really know where to guide people.
Me neither. I will say this, though. Atlanta's still throwing 65.5% of the time. Like, Ryan's still averaging over 40 pass attempts per game.
Yeah, but in the Awesemo advanced stats tool, which adjusts rushing rate for game situation for the lead that they don't have, they're 12th in adjusted rush rate. They're top 12.
I wonder where they were last year.
Yeah, I
we don't have last year, right? Yeah.
I'll check it right now for us.
Cool.
But yeah, so I just really don't see this offense as high upside as we thought. That said, if they get into a shootout here, as we said, sneaky shootout potential, I don't mind having a run back option because we know who they are.
Yep, no doubt about it. All right, let's talk about the Chargers and Kansas City. Before we do, just want to shout out. Yeah, I can't wait for this game. Shout out our sponsor and our partner, Prize Picks, because as you know, and a lot of people love Prize Picks because it looks good. It's easy to play. You're not going to go up against sharks and optimizers and MME and all any of that. You have none of that. It's straight prop-based contest. And they want to help you get started with a pretty wicked deposit bonus. Haven't used that word in a while. If you sign up and deposit using the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, you get up to $100 instant match deposit bonus upon signing up and depositing. Here's what Prize Picks is. Matt and I talk about it all the time, where we give you our picks for the week. We've done quite well so far. All you have to do to get started, pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players that are available on the board, right? To go over or under their projected score. So you're betting the over under, or you're picking the over under, and you're putting that into a 2 through 5 player lineup. If you correctly pick all 5, say you do a 5, you can net up to 10x your entry fee. But also you can do cross sport ones. You can mix them. With basketball coming up, you can do basketball and football in the same one. Maybe you're someone who watches the WNBA. You could throw one of them in there as well, or esports, whatever it is. We got you. They got you at Prize Picks. Use that promo code Awesemo. Check it out. Take advantage of this $100 that match deposit bonus when you do. Matt, do you have a Prize Picks prop for today?
I don't feel great about this.
Okay,
but
let's hear
I
it.
think that I'm believing the coach speak in DeAndre Swift just getting more involved in the Detroit Lions offense. And I think there's going to be another game just like last week's Monday night against the Packers, where there's a ton of points scored. So I'm going with DeAndre Swift over 40.5 rush yards. I think he is by far the most talented player besides TJ Hawkinson on that team, and they need to manufacture more touches for him. I think they give him rushing opportunities, even if they're coming from behind in that game.
Love it. Love it. All right. God, this. All right. So I'm going over 49.5 receiving yards for Odell Beckham. I know it's kind of sketchy, but all he needs to do is hit 50 yards with no Jarvis Landry. And he's a full go in practice, not limited, a full go. I think that we get I think we get 50 plus receiving yards for Odell Beckham, and wouldn't be surprised if he cruises over that. So yeah, deep ball, baby. Let's get it. Prize Picks. Use the promo code Awesome. I'll get up to $100 when you sign up and deposit. Where were we, Matt? LA and Kansas City?
Yeah, let's do it. Hey, and just to answer your question before, Atlanta was 27th in that same metric. They are now 12th in adjusted rush rate. So they are definitely running more often, not effectively.
Wow. Okay. It's crazy too. I mean, passing 65% of the time, throwing over 40 times per game, but you're saying like even in negative game scripts, they're running more than they should be?
Yeah, when we game adjust it, when we situation adjust it, they seem to be a higher rushing team. Again, it's a smaller sample, but that's why we try to adjust out the situations to try to figure it out. The reason they're passing more is because they are playing from behind.
Bam, over 100 likes. Let's go. You guys are great. I didn't even have to say anything. Thank you so much. Hey, and subscribe too. All right, let's do Kansas City and LA. Kansas City hosting the Chargers at Arrowhead, 6.5 point favorites, 54.5 point total. I want to kick it off actually with the Chargers here, because to me, dude, none of these guys are wildly priced. You've got Herbert at 6,500. You've got Allen at 66. Mike Williams, who leads the team in like every statistical category, already has 3 targets inside the 10-yard line, has Herbert's only 2 passing touchdowns have gone to him. Like he's 64. Jared Cook is 3,900. Speaking to DraftKings pricing, of course, if this game does shoot out, and Herbert went for 300 plus yards in both meetings against Kansas City last year, despite low volume, he was just very effective with almost 10 yards per attempt. I know he struggled this year from a fantasy standpoint, but these prices are mouthwateringly good.
Yeah. And I think we need to step out of the projections bubble for a minute. And I'm guilty of this, overweighting projections, because just nailing our projections is not what wins us a GPP tournament. It's understanding the game environment that players play in.
And what can happen. Yeah.
And when we talk about the 2 offenses on the Chargers and the Chiefs meeting, and the defenses have not been overly impressive. Certainly on Kansas City side, it's a liability. The Chargers have been whelming, our favorite word of the day, but we need to talk about this game environment and the lack of ownership that has surrounded these Chargers players. Almost surprisingly, I see the Keenan Allen bounce back game, but that's really the only play that's garnering a huge amount of ownership here. I'm seeing almost 15% expected ownership for Keenan Allen, but I guess it's because of salary and because of the other players in good spots. And it's probably because of projections that Austin Eckler isn't looking like a strong play. But let us just say here that because of the type of game he is going to find himself in, Eckler is an amazing play this week because of the receiving upside. Finally showed that in week 2. All those season-long owners of Eckler can finally take a sigh of relief. But Herbert, too. There are several touchdowns already this season in the passing game that have been called back. Donald Parham, Jared Cook. And so Herbert's numbers are deflated. But the level of play, yes, the efficiency has gone down a little bit. The level of play isn't seriously degraded whatsoever. And then maybe this is a positive thing for Mike Williams where he truly has a better role in this version of the Chargers offense. But I think it might just be variance that teams are blanketing Keenan Allen. And eventually this volume that we saw Jared Cook and especially Mike Williams get, it's just going to go over to Allen and Eckler over the course of the season.
You're singing sweet, sweet music to me right now, Matt. No pun intended. Actually, no, I meant every bit of that.
We're going to get that all. We're going to get that so much this season now.
Oh, it's happening. Yeah, for sure. But I'm with you. There's just so the biggest thing too is like, how often do you get to stack a team that all have like mid-range price points that isn't particularly high owned, but also has a massive ceiling? It just feels like one of those spots where a lot of the factors, a lot of the pieces of the puzzle come together here, and they might not on game day, but it's not often that you get a guy with Herbert's ceiling and with Mike Williams' ceiling and Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler, all at reasonable price points. And I think our top stack tool had the Chargers with like 5% ownership to Justin Herbert. Granted, I know that the top stack probability isn't that high, and it's actually considered a negative leverage play, but marginally less than 1%. I still like him this week. And I think you're right. You got to step outside once in a while, that statistical driven bubble, and look at just everything here. And there's a lot to like for the Chargers, man. How would you rank these guys for stacks?
I still like Keenan Allen a ton. The Awesemo projection does have him inside the top 10 and his salary is outside the top 10. So I completely understand why the ownership is there. Mike Williams still feels pretty point chasey to me, but then I looked at expected fantasy points. Do you want to guess where he ranks among wide receivers in expected fantasy points?
Go ahead. I don't, I'm assuming it's going to be bad.
It's number 1.
Oh, he is. Okay. Well, I knew it had to be good or bad, right? But
21.5 expected fantasy points for Mike Williams. I'm happy for the guy. First round pick, finally living up to some of that expectation.
Early first round pick.
Early in the top 10. You're right. You're
7,
right.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing. He has more fantasy points, just a little more fantasy points than expected, meaning he's being efficient on that volume. I don't know if that that volume is sustainable, but if Mike Williams is a reliable pass catcher on this team in general, this offense gets stronger over the course of the season, not worse by any means. And you could still have games where Keenan Allen is demanding double-digit targets, no problem. What's really fun, too, is there's so many great run-back options. Of course, you can, in large field tournaments, you could even do the tight ends or Jalen Guyton as an off-the-wall pick, or do a Chiefs stack and then save salary by going and running it back with Herbert.
I like it. Yeah, Guyton was a guy I had a little bit of last week, and he disappointed, which brings me to the next question before we get to the Chiefs. McNasty says, LA didn't perform as well as I thought against the Cowboys. Why do you think they can do exceptionally well against Kansas City? Because it was one game, man. It was one game. Packers didn't do exceptionally well against the Saints, and then they shit on Detroit. And you say, yeah, well, Detroit has a bad defense. Sure. But the New Orleans Saints were fantastic against Green Bay. Next week, awful. I mean, just completely stagnant against Carolina. Sure, Carolina's defense is better than they've been in the past. They drafted only defensive players last year, so expect that. But there is the level of parity in the NFL is unlike anything else. So to think that a game can't shoot out or that they can't perform well just because they didn't last week is not the right approach. And another thing, Matt, last thing I'll say on this, when it comes to the NFL, literally one or two plays can be the difference from really bad to really good. Like, 2 deep balls connected from Justin Herbert, not specifically last week, but that are connected for touchdowns one week and dropped the next week or misfired the next week can be the difference between 15 fantasy points and 25 or 27,
And a huge change in the public perception of
exactly,
player,
which is why I like
ownership.
this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Because the public perception right now is, oh my God, Dallas was awful last year. How could you not produce against them? Well, makes me kind of interested. And well, Kansas City breaks the top stack tool every week. That's no different this week. Just insanely high top stack probability, but it's amazing because their leverage score is so high, despite the fact that they're so good. And it's because it's very hard to stack Mahomes, Kelsey, and Hill in the same lineup.
It really is. And so I just offered one possible route that I'm sure I won't be alone on by getting those top Chiefs players. We all know who they are, Hill and Kelsey, and then saving some salary by not going to Mahomes, but going to Herbert instead and just betting on the game environment. And just to add on to what you were saying in that answer to that last question in the comments, imagine for a second what the Chargers would have had to do differently on offense had the Cowboys scored 2 more touchdowns, several more points. Imagine what they would have to do in terms of play calling, in terms of passing, in terms of deep passing. That is what we mean by game environment. It's the other offense that matters almost as much as the defense the offense is playing against. So here is that other offense, the best offense in football. And they showed us why, even in a loss on Sunday night, they can be the most lethal for fantasy. Now, what was really exciting for us GPP players is that we finally saw deep touchdowns from somebody other than Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce, although they were plenty involved. Demarcus Robinson had a long touchdown. Byron Pringle had a touchdown. And in general, or compared to week 1, Hill did disappoint. So I absolutely could see a bounce back game for him here. There's no one even close to Travis Kelce in terms of the projections. And if you look at optimal lineup percentage, Kelce crushes the rest of the tight end field. So, I mean, what is there to say? We know exactly how this offense operates. I guess there is something to say about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I still don't see it with this player. And I'll tell you one of the main reasons. Because of the Chiefs' deep ball percentage, they don't actually reach the red zone that often for a running back. So if they're not getting targets, as Clyde Edwards-Helaire isn't right now, they're not getting any quality opportunities. No red zone touches and no targets equals not a valuable running back, even on one of the best offenses we've seen in a decade.
That was, and I liked Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming into the season. We all know that. And I'm still not giving up on him yet. My one single concern was exactly what you just stated. It wasn't that the Kansas City Chiefs were efficient, it was that they could score so quickly, so fast from anywhere on the field. That was truly my only concern was, are there not going to be those goal line attempts? Are there not going to be those attempts inside the 10? It definitely is a concern. 4,800 though, I can't say I'm scared off by that though, because when you're in an offense like this, there's still going to be weeks where you get chances for sure. And I think you're spot on, but I will have some Clyde Edwards-Helaire just because when you have an implied total above 30 points, still just being on the field is better than, not being on the field for the Kansas City Chiefs, but it is a concern. And I'm not sure if this is serious or not, but Heinous one, I'm assuming that's how you pronounce whatever that word is, says, so we can drop the Julio as wash narrative, but if Keenan Allen has another bad week, does that put him in the wash discussion? I just want to point out that Keenan Allen has back-to-back 100-yard games. And I'm not saying that he's been great. He hasn't scored yet, but one touchdown, right? Because he's got, if you take away the bonuses on DraftKings, but 100-point bonuses are important. If you were to give him one touchdown, then his outlook is entirely different. But yeah, back-to-back 100-yard games. Keenan Allen is 100% fine. Zero.
We're not worried about Keenan Allen. And this just says something about the Chargers offense not producing in the scoreboard category, but in the potential fantasy points category. Keenan Allen's number 3 amongst wide receivers in expected fantasy points.
There you go. All right, Matt, I got a massive thunderstorm about to roll through. Hopefully I don't lose power. So let's try and get through this. Very quickly, any peripheral options on Kansas City that like Pringle or Robinson or Mecole Hardman, just quick, and then we'll go to Kansas or Cincinnati, Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I'll take any of them in large field tournaments. Just Mecole Hardman's speed. I don't care that he's getting 3 to 5 targets. In this offense, I know manufactured touches can turn into big plays for speedsters like him.
Yep. I'm a Tulsa Dog says Clyde Edwards-Helaire is Laffy's AFC version of Rojo. No, listen, if Clyde Edwards-Helaire has a couple more games like this, I'll take the L. I'll hang my head in shame and take the L for sure. But we'll see. We'll see. Not giving up quite yet. Rojo's straight dead to me.
Oh,
Cincinnati,
Arians doghouse, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's like he said he was starting him, I guess, just to torture him. Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh only laying 3 points. Surprising game last week. Was it that Pittsburgh was bad or that the Raiders are actually legitimately good? I guess we'll find out soon enough, Matt. But this game has a 44-point total. If you're looking at Cincinnati, I still have respect for this Pittsburgh run defense. I really do. I'm not thrilled about Mixon, although I think his price has been adjusted for the matchup. Jamar Chase has been very good. Higbee and Higgins have both been involved. Or sorry, Boyd and Higgins have both been involved. But I don't know. Like Joe Burrow has not enamored me quite yet. I can't say this is one of my favorite teams to target this week.
No, this is a divisional matchup where, at least right now, the defenses on both sides of the ball are outplaying their respective offenses that they're playing. And it starts with the quarterbacks on both sides. Last year with Joe Burrow, at least, we saw so much pass volume that even if he wasn't being particularly efficient on that volume, that we wanted it for fantasy because the upside was there every week. And yeah, it's been great to see Jamar Chase be efficient in this offense, but overall, this just doesn't look like the fantasy friendly passing game that we expected it to be. And part of that has to do with Burrow's troubles overall with his efficiency. I think he's 21st in the advanced metrics that I look at, expected points added and completion percentage over expectation. And then on the other side of the ball, the rush defense is a little bit better for the Steelers, as you mentioned, but they're still a top 10 overall defense. One thing I will say is we saw them get beat over the top on a deep ball with Henry Ruggs, and they've been tested deep a little bit more this year. Could there be explosive plays? Yes. Do I think that the most likely outcome for this game is really a run-heavy defensive battle? Also, yes.
They've faced each other twice a year, every year, and these are very rarely high-scoring games. I think one of the last 20 has gone over 50 total points.
Yeah, and again, I just getting out of the projections one more time. These are two teams that are very aware of the other's identity, how they are planning to win. But you know, as you said, the bounce of the ball can change statistics in one play. But how are both teams going to try to win? It's with their defenses,
no doubt. And look, Cincinnati's offense, assuming Joe Burrow is competent, and I think he will be. You know, he was in week 1, but they got a lot of firepower, more than they've had in a long time in all fronts. But I'm just not that interested. And then with Pittsburgh, this is the spot that I'm going to be paying close attention to because Deontay Johnson isn't practicing or didn't practice yesterday with that knee. Doesn't seem to be a long-term thing day to day. I think he sits this week, just speculation. Chase Claypool could become very appealing if Deontay Johnson sits. You get two outside receivers. Yes, Deontay Johnson's more of a possession guy, and Roethlisberger, no one got the ball out quicker than Roethlisberger. Spent less time in the pocket than any quarterback in the league last year. And while the run blocking was bad, the pass protection wasn't awful. So Claypool is that deep threat, but he's also the guy that if he gave you 100 yards and 2 touchdowns this week, wouldn't be shocking against Cincinnati. If Johnson sits and it kind of concentrates this passing game a little bit more, I have some interest for sure.
Yeah, a little bit. I do think, as you mentioned, that Roethlisberger's time to release continues to be top 5 fastest in the league. And that's really because unlike his elder statesman Tom Brady in Tampa Bay, he has no offensive line in Pittsburgh to speak of, and they can't stop anybody from rushing him. So he has to get the ball out. That means his amount of deep 10 attempts that he wants to get to Chase Claypool, who, as you said, is their deep ball specialist, it's limited. He still took a couple of shots last week. They couldn't connect. In general, what I'm really concerned about is Roethlisberger's completion percentage taking yet another dip. It's down 3% so
he's
far
in trouble
this year. And yeah, in that same expected points added and completion percentage over expected combined metric, he's 23rd in the NFL. It might not turn around for Ben Roethlisberger. Yeah. And so,
yeah, go ahead.
Now you're talking about an offense that's going to need to manufacture short area touches, and that they could go 4 ways, really. Naji Harris, Juju Smith-Schuster, and their 2 tight ends, Eric Ebron and Pat Freiermuth. I think just from a big play potential, my favorite is Chase Claypool. But honestly, none of these players are in go-to spots for me.
It's fair.
And it's surprising.
I have a little bit more interest in Claypool just because, and I'm a sucker for big bodied receivers that get targeted deep because they can make the contested catches. They can haul in some bad throws and their end zone and their red zone threats. There's 8 deep ball attempts from Roethlisberger this year. 4 of them have been to Deontay Johnson. 4 of them have been to Claypool. Of course, none to Juju, who had one of the lowest ADOTs in the league last year. And Roethlisberger faced the tough Buffalo secondary in week 1. It looks like the Raiders aren't great, obviously, but they're not as bad as we anticipated. So I think the upside's there with Claypool. I do not disagree that there's also just a lot of questioning whether or not Roethlisberger still has it. And his adjusted completion percentage is higher by about 8% than his actual completion percentage, but it's still not elite. So I think I would say take that for what it's worth. And if Deontay Johnson sits and you're willing to take that risk on a guy that we saw in his rookie season has multiple touchdown upside in Claypool, I'm willing to go there. Matt, quickly on Naji Harris, what are your thoughts?
All volume, no efficiency right now, minus 3.6 fantasy points below expectation outside the top 60 running backs, but as expected, top 10 in expected fantasy points at the position. Sure, 16 expected DraftKings points is nothing to scoff at, but is 7th in salary. I still think that this is a player that might be looking more like a first rounder like Josh Jacobs, where you knew all of their touches were going to happen in wins, but bad offensive line, no efficiency from the quarterback position. I'm not sold on Naji Harris, especially with 13.7% ownership right now.
Jordan, you're crushing the production game today, man. Looks great. I just pulled up the YouTube. Looks very good, man. Jordan Klein, as always, coming through. Jordan got a ton of super chats. Was that you and me on the other day when the super chats?
It was Monday. Yeah.
Just
they were raining dollar bills.
Hey, Matt, Baltimore and Detroit. I'm so excited for this game. Like stupidly excited for this game because Detroit's offense hasn't been that bad. They have an implied total of almost 22 points. They're 7.5-point dogs at home. I want to ask you just a quick question. If I were to say, how shocked would you be in terms of like a scale of 1 to 10, if the winning Millie Maker lineup had Lamar Jackson, Tyson Williams, and Marquis Brown in it this week?
So a complete onslaught where the touchdowns were spread out in the passing game only to Marquise, but in the rushing game, Lamar rushed for stupid yardage and Tyson got the touchdowns. That's sort of the scenario we're talking about.
Also, yeah. Tyson Williams has the only 6 targets that have gone to running backs in his backfield this year. So a little passing, but not a lot. Yeah.
So yeah, that's floor to me, but not necessarily ceiling. So I guess Tyson Williams kind of makes sense as this off the wall game environment play, but the projections compared to salary-based expectations aren't really fantastic for him. Now, one of the things I was looking at to begin the season is I actually thought I could take the over on the Lions win total because I expected their offense to be a little bit more competent than everyone expected. And so far, that's exactly what's happened. What I didn't expect was for their defense to be among the worst defenses I've ever seen in my entire life.
It's wonderful, though.
For fantasy, it really is. And the fact that the Jaguars in the same year look like they're going to give them a run for their money. This is from a fantasy points perspective, we couldn't be happier. And Detroit, I think it was Makajeski in a previous show this week said that Detroit is just done in the secondary because they have 2 of their starting cornerbacks out for the year, or at least for a significant time. And so, yes, I'm fine going to the Baltimore passing game. Yes, I'm fine playing naked Lamar Jackson. I think the projections are underselling the ceiling of Jackson this week. I'm having trouble moving away from him in cash lineups. I know in general, we want to save the premium salary for the flex positions, but Lamar Jackson's matchup, it could just go right in so many ways for Jackson this week that I'm not sure I want to get away from it at all in cash.
I don't either. And hey, let's not overlook the fact that Baltimore's pass defense has also struggled. I know they've dealt with injuries themselves, but they've been bottom 10 according to most metrics. I mean, the reason I asked that question, right, was because the Detroit defense is so bad everywhere, but their offense has been serviceable, like we talked about. And usually running Lamar Jackson naked makes sense. For anyone new to DFS, that doesn't mean actually, running alongside him straight out of like an old school scene with Will Ferrell, looking for.
Jordan, can you splice that scene in, please? Can you just put the
put that in? Where were they going streaking through the quad? Was he going to KFC? Was it Taco Bell? Oh,
yeah. And then it's I forget where they were going. It was through the quad is what I remember him yelling.
Right.
But then beyond that.
And then she gets him in the car naked with her friends. She's like, honey, can we go to, was it Taco Bell? Someone will tell me in chat. These guys always come through. But like Tyson Williams right now, I think is the best running back on this team. And I don't like the timeshare, but I do like that if there is a pass game involvement, it's going to be him. I think he's a little bit overpriced. But I don't mind pairing Lamar with like Marquis Brown, who has actually looked like a number one receiver and has that huge play upside. Whereas Brown can have a couple big plays and Lamar can still have a great game on the ground, and they're not really eating into each other's production. So I'd say this, and Mark Andrews has been awful, but he's still there. I think there are a lot of, and I'll end with this, Matt, there are a lot of variations that make sense with Baltimore that could absolutely hit against this Detroit defense.
Yeah. So play the most probable one in cash and then don't abandon them in tournaments. Just play different lower probability players, or even, play Lamar and just get weird in other positions too. Last thing I'll say is that because of I'm actually surprised at this most with the Ravens this year, they still have the second highest adjusted rush rate in the league, as you would expect. But the pass volume for Marquis Brown is there, not just on a team market share level. He's 11th at his position in expected fantasy points per game, and he's performing above expectations. So could he actually be a true wide receiver one? It's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it might be doable, and Bateman's going to be out at least this week and probably next week too. Detroit, TJ Hawkinson. There was a conversation like who's going to become the next, who's going to enter the big three territory among tight ends, right? Baltimore has faced Darren Waller, Travis Kelce, and now TJ Hawkinson to start the season. Crazy. Just a gauntlet of tight ends. Hawkinson's good, man. And you know what? Jared Goff, he's really good. Not Jared Goff, but Hawkins is really good. Jared Goff has looked competent enough. I mean, he's getting the ball downfield to guys like Quintez Cephas. I hit the over prop on the pass attempts late in the fourth quarter, but early in the first quarter, I lost my prop that Jared Goff doesn't throw for more than 36 yards, doesn't convert a 36-yard pass attempt. Yeah. And I said, Matt, when we were talking, I was like, if he does it, it's going to be to Cephas. I just don't think it happens. And he did early in the game. So it was over. But they don't look that bad. And DeAndre Swift has some big upside. Hawkinson's looked great. The receivers are still somewhat of a mess, though. So quick breakdown on Detroit for us.
Yeah, they're actually going to be fine from a fantasy perspective this season because of that terrible defense and the at least average play on offense. I think Jared Goff is a player who, because of a lack of rushing upside, he's less appealing, even though he's 22nd among quarterbacks in salary. But we know where the ball is going to go. We know where this offense is going to be concentrated to. And we've seen Goff take his share of deep shots, as you just mentioned. We could see Tyrell Williams play this week, not planning on playing him in our rosters, though. But I have to say, DraftKings salaries have been all over the TJ Hawkinson breakout for basically a whole season. He was often third or fourth amongst tight ends in salary basically all of 2020 because of this potential here. And Goff knows that he needs to check it down plenty in order to move the sticks in these comeback efforts that he's going to be in all season. So Hawkinson, number 2 in expected fantasy points amongst tight ends, only behind Travis Kelce right now. And DeAndre Swift as well, impressive in that same metric, 18.1 expected fantasy points. That's 6th amongst running backs. He's being used in both the rushing and the receiving game, making him really appealing at running back 15. A little annoyed to see over 10% ownership right now. 11.1% is running back 7 currently projected on the slate. So you're not going to be alone, but I understand it here. I think there are going to be plenty of dump offs, and we could easily see 1 rushing and 1 receiving touchdown for Swift here.
Okay. I like it. Matt, one more guess. If Travis Kelce is number 1 in fantasy points among his position and TJ Hawkins is number 3. Who is number 2?
In fantasy points?
Yeah.
Darren Waller.
Rob Gronkowski.
All right. Well, I got played like
I had a feeling
fiddle.
because I was going to say Waller too. I was like, oh, interesting. Someone just said, was it Cody in chat just said that Williams just went to IR. Thanks, Cody. I don't know if
Tyrell Williams. Thank you. Okay, so he'll get out of our projections so that he's in there right now.
Yeah, I'm assuming I haven't seen it yet. It must have been recent, but let's see. Yep, good call. Thank you, Cody. 8 minutes ago from Rap Sheet, which means Williams is playing this week. All right, New Orleans and New England. Matt, since we got about 35 minutes here, I want to give Jordan at least some time to cross over to are you on the next show too, Jordan? My God, this guy just grinding.
What a beast.
Alvin Kamara really struggled last week. I mean, the guy had less rushing yards than carries, and they couldn't get anything going through the air. This has the lowest total on the slate at 42. Both teams with very low totals. 19.5 for the Saints, 22.5 for the Pats. What do you do here? Hit on both teams so we can get to some good games after this.
Yeah. So this is NO versus NE, and NONE spells none. Ooh, and that's what I want in my that. Rosters.
And NE and NO smells Neno.
No. Oh, well, we almost got it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't know. What do you want? Like Jameis Winston looked like one of the most inept quarterbacks in the league last week after looking incredibly efficient. I guess that was to be expected. The variance in his play has always been something, but the lack of touches for Kamara in that game environment was really what was alarming. Carolina, the defense they played last week is much more impressive than we thought. But still, this offense just looks like one of those offenses that we don't really want any part of. Marquez Callaway continuing to disappoint. Now has a salary outside the top 50, but barely has a projection inside the top 50. Deep tournaments only. Adam Troutman had one game with 23% target share and still ranks outside the top 25 at his position in expected fantasy points per game. And on the New England side, this Mac Jones offense looks like the Tom Brady of 2001 offense, where they would just have a couple of accurate chain moving passes every week from their quarterback and then win games with their rushing and their defense. So Damian Harris, I guess, has a fine projection based on his RB19 salary. 5,600 for a player that's going to get that many touches is fine, but we saw James White much more involved last week, and especially with New Orleans being strong on the defensive line, we could see White involved once again. I actually like him a little bit better this week. His projection is just it's never really going to get inside the top 25, but we know the way White hits his ceiling game. He gets suddenly 6 to 9 receptions, and then he gets in the end zone for 1 or 2 of them. It could absolutely happen here in this short area passing attack of the Patriots.
Well, and if you're looking at last week, he also got in the end zone with a goal line carry. Inside the 10-yard line, he had a carry inside the 10 and scored on it. So
I know it was just crazy, but then Harris bounced back and got angry about it and had that crazy run
for sure. Yeah, Harris looks pretty good. That was a rumbling man, huh? That was awesome. Like Marshawn Lynch style against the Saints back in the postseason.
Yes.
That was awesome, man. All right, let's talk about Arizona and Jacksonville, because this game's kind of cool, right? Because you have Kyler Murray, who's been out just excellent. I mean, he is crushing. And then you have DeAndre Hopkins, who we know is the alpha in this offense. And despite last week's game, he wasn't great, but still found the end zone, primary end zone target, no question. Kirk, Rondell Moore, who was amazing. 88% of his yards are after the catch this year. Explain that one. Great. And
I could have told you that after watching his college tape.
Yes. Well, 77% at Purdue were after 78% were after the catch, but I didn't know it would get higher than that.
I don't think NFL defenders have any more interest in tackling that guy than college defenders did.
You might be right. Did you see him try and tackle I forget who it was that picked the ball off?
Oh no, I missed it.
Oh man, he just starts like slapping him on the side. It's so great. It's so great. But it's a tough team to figure out, even in the backfield. Like you and I probably have different opinions on Edmonds this week, but I'm not really as excited about him as other people are, because I think if they take an early lead, and it's sensible to think they could, given how much Trevor Lawrence has struggled, that James Conner will be involved on the ground game. And in a shootout style game, Chase Edmonds gets a lot more in the passing game. He does have 9 targets on the year, which is nice. James Conner is not going to be used in the passing game. But as far as goal line attempts go, is Edmonds going to get any of them? The likely answer is probably not. Kyler Murray also has legs. There are some Devin Singletary type, on a lesser scale, on a less concerning scale, some Devin Singletary type concerns that I have with Chase Edmonds.
Okay, I think that's very fair. And you know what this reminds me of? I believe it was week 8 last season when the Chiefs were playing the Jets, and a ton of ownership was coalescing around the Chiefs starting running back that week, Le'Veon Bell. And what happened that week? The passing game went absolutely berserk at minimum ownership because they were priced up in salary for a fantastic matchup.
Yep.
What I'm really surprised, or maybe I shouldn't be as surprised about, but I really honestly am. So I was surprised about DeAndre Hopkins' ownership. Right now, coming in at 5.2%, wide receiver 24. This looks like one of the best early options where we pay up to be contrarian. We got to figure it out at the rest of our roster positions. But when we know that DeAndre Hopkins could have a monster performance here, the ceiling game is so high. I think that we could have, I think DeAndre Hopkins might be one of my absolute favorite tournament plays this week, simply because there's just not enough people on him compared to his probability of breaking the slate.
I like it. And I just went back and saw what Jordan ran.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
The gym? Oh, I didn't realize it had our faces in it.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
That's quick work there, man. That was awesome.
Wow.
That's why Jordan gets the super chats.
That's amazing.
I'm not on any of these secondary, tertiary options for Arizona this week, but I'll say this much. This is where I'm not on them as like primary options, but I think we have to just kind of concede the idea, or we have to embrace the idea each week, Matt, that every week Arizona's playing, especially teams like Jacksonville or like Minnesota last week or whoever it is, high scoring games are just when they can throttle an opponent, that if you're playing a lot of lineups, you probably want to have a couple with Murray and then Hopkins with maybe a Moore or a Green or Kirk, or just one of them. It's a guessing game. You're spinning the wheel. But if the wheel lands on the right players, it could be a huge week, as we've seen from Christian Kirk in week 1 and Rondale Moore in week 2.
Yeah, these are, and we haven't even talked about Murray and the fact that he's 12 points over expectation this season. I mean, he has one of the best seasons in fantasy football in his range of outcomes this year. And against Jacksonville, do we have any concerns whatsoever?
No. When you look at over expectation and fantasy points under expectation, how are you really gauging that, in the sense that, like, if they're over expectation, it means they're playing really well, but how do you look at sustainability? And as far as like a regression, and as far as under expectation, how many of these guys that we know are good and are performing under expectation, do we not say, hey, that's not good, but instead say, okay, it's not good, but they should be better going forward?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is the purpose of separating out expected and then a player's points versus expected, below or above, right? Because the expected is essentially their volume. It is their opportunity translated to a number we can all understand on a fantasy point scale. That's great. The over or under expectation really has to do with a comparison to their expected fantasy points. So it's even more impressive that he's number 1 in fantasy points over expected, because he's 7th in expected fantasy points.
Right.
It probably means he's good. Is there a bit of variance and randomness in him being number 1? Yes. But the fact that he's so high in expectation and then so even higher in over expected, we see this over the last 2 seasons with Christian McCaffrey. He leads the league or running backs in expected fantasy points, but he also leads them in fantasy points over expectation, which leads us to one conclusion and one conclusion only. He's good.
Yep.
Now, yes, some of it is randomness, but
for sure. I just wanted to point out, and you explained that well, that you have to contextualize those stats. Like just because they're over or just because they're under doesn't mean it's good or doesn't mean it's bad. Like there's a lot more that goes into it. Jacksonville, Matt, man, what a shit team this is, huh? DJ Shark coming off a week where he was targeted 12 times, only saw 4 looks last week. I'm still actually interested because I think Arizona's secondary really, when they've been tested, they have failed the test. Okay. When they've been tested, they weren't tested at all in week 1 because of their defensive line and the pass rush, but they coughed up a huge touchdown to KJ Osborne. There are some issues here in his defense. And I think when you look at guys like Shark or Marvin Jones, if you are stacking Arizona, I actually do like a run back option for the Jacksonville Jaguars this week.
Yeah. And I think I understand why too, because they're actually they've turned into a bit of a funnel defense, but early in the season, that can be really volatile. So right now, some of the most basic stats that a lot of DFS players are going to be looking at, yards per pass attempt, Arizona has actually ranked pretty high. They're 7th in the league. And that has a lot to do, like you said, with their ability to completely shut down Tennessee's passing attack in week 1, and Minnesota not really caring as much about their passing game, although they did have some explosive passing plays last week against Arizona, but they've been 30th in the league in yards per carry allowed, which is making James Robinson, in a game where the Jaguars are not projected to be close, Robinson is popping as a value play in a lot of these optimizer runs, and I do not see it. I do have to say I'm nearly contractually obligated to say that the projections for Robinson outpace his salary-based expectations, which mean that if you're looking for a value play in cash, it's fine. I agree with you. I think I would rather have Marvin Jones, who is making his, in my opinion, is the number 1 on this team, but isn't priced like it. And then maybe DJ Chark, who with a salary outside of the top 30 wide receivers and almost nobody projected to own him, I'm fine with that.
Yep, I'm with you there. Anthony says, regarding Hopkins, are you not scared of his current injury? No, if we get more information, sure. But Hopkins is notorious for sitting out a couple days with, minor injuries and stuff like that. So if he plays and he's got like a bruised rib, I would assume that he's going to be okay, but it's worth monitoring for sure.
Yeah, definitely is.
Yeah, it's worth monitoring, but is it something that right now I'm factoring into like projections and stuff? No, I don't think you can do that. New York Jets and Denver. All right, Matt, the New York Jets are 10.5-point dogs to the Broncos. And let's not anoint the Broncos as the next Super Bowl front runner because they faced what, Jacksonville and the New York Giants. So, okay, pump the brakes a little bit. And actually, this is the lowest total on the week at 41.5, which just goes to show you that the Jets implied total is absolutely dreadful. 15.5. Okay. 15.5 implied total. But boy, was I stoked to see Cortland Sutton pop off and look like that alpha we've been waiting to see. He didn't score, but dude, Cortland Sutton looked like the type of guy that can have dominant weeks this year. I'll let you hit on both teams, preferably speak with brevity when it comes to the New York Jets, and then we can spend a little bit of time on the Broncos.
Yeah, you're really going off the wall, large field tournament. You're seeing something that the rest of the field is not seeing if you're going for the New York Jets. I hope there are better days ahead, but they were clueless against the Patriots. And I guess you could assume that Bill Belichick against a rookie quarterback, and he always has a little extra dialed up for the Jets because of their history there. There will be better days, but I'm not sure there are going to be significantly better days, even against the Denver Broncos. The 15.5-point implied total is like some Adam Gasian numbers, and they probably do outproduce that. But I do have to say the Awesemo sports betting model has this as an implied 10.3-point spread. So it's not like 10. Yeah. So it's spot on in terms of implied totals. Nothing excites us really about the Jets side at all. Corey Davis, maybe. Braxton Berrios was targeted way too much for Braxton Berrios to be targeted in the second half, but I'm not going back to the well there. With Denver, I think the most intriguing part of this whole team is, yes, they have a really good chance of going 3-0, which often has really high playoff probability. So are we talking about this team in December?
No.
Very well may be. I think that they look like one of the flukiest 3-0 starts that we could have in a while.
I don't think they're bad. I just think if you're not taking these matchups into account, you're crazy.
That well said. So why don't we take advantage of the third juicy matchup in a row? One thing I will say is that I wouldn't be surprised if a Javonte Williams breakout game happened right here. He's getting more touches per snap played than Melvin Gordon, even though their touch share is almost directly down the middle. Basically, what we're saying is that even though they have Williams in less, they have him doing more with less opportunity, which means that if he does get more playing time simply by being good, then it could be off to the races with him. In the passing game, you mentioned it, Cortland Sutton, he still doesn't have a salary that reflects just how much opportunity he really got last week. The Awesemo projections are way ahead of his wide receiver 19 salary. You won't be alone. 11% projected ownership there, but I completely understand why. Nobody on the Jets side of the ball is able to stop him, I don't think.
So I actually just released yesterday morning a video on the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel, must start and sit players for week 3. And by the way, if you guys play season long, redraft, whatever it is, and you're into that stuff, I would love for you to check that channel out. I legitimately think you'll enjoy it. A lot of short form, like 10 to 15 minute videos to help you every week, whether it's waiver wire, start, sit, and a ton of other stuff. 2 live streams a week with Ben Rossa, myself, and Eitan. 3, actually. We got a Sunday morning one. If you're in the season long too, and you just want to brush up and not spend a ton of time on it, right? Like maybe you're just taking a 10-minute dump, Matt, and you're like, what's a good way to take up my time? I've read this shampoo bottle way too much. And you're like, oh, let me watch one of Lofty's videos. I would love that. And for you to like and subscribe at the same time. But in saying that, I actually listed Javonte Williams as a must start this week because people drafted him, and I wasn't necessarily huge on this, but drafted him probably as like an RB3, some an RB2, and but mostly, let's say, a flex, right? 7th, 8th round. If you draft him in the 7th, 8th round, and you don't have a ton of options, you probably want to play him because he actually has out-touched Melvin Gordon on the ground, has 1 fewer touch altogether. But the biggest thing from a DFS standpoint is he's only $4,900. And eventually that game is going to come against the Jets where you're 10.5-point favorites. And I think Zach Wilson, assuming he continues to make mistakes against a pretty decent Broncos defense, will give them really great field position too. And that's something to consider. Time of possession, field position for a running back. I love all of that. It just lines up as a good matchup for Javonte Williams, which means Melvin Gordon is going to crush this week.
Right. And, we already saw 1 breakaway run from him. It's not like he's dust, but Williams is impressive.
For sure. I'm just saying, like, it always goes the opposite direction. Any thoughts on Sutton or Tim Patrick or Noah Fant this week?
Yeah, I think the auxiliary options are large field playable for sure. Tim Patrick had a touchdown last week, and we should just say that the Denver passing game does not look incompetent. Yes, we're contextualizing for matchups, but they look like they're going to spread the ball around. They're going to be able to move the ball. And so that means Noah Fant is fine at tight end 7 in salary. He's tight end 6 in expected fantasy points. So he doesn't jump off the page, but against the Jets, you could easily see one of these guys having 2 touchdowns in a matchup like this. Hamler too.
Jordan was just in a position where I was like freaked out because I didn't know he was actually in his chair because it's so dark in it. There you are. It's like where's Waldo every time he's producing a show. It's amazing.
Well, he's producing 9 shows right now. That's what
I know. It's great. Jordan, while we're at it, can you throw the promo up on the screen? I know people have looked for ways to get behind the paywall, to get the ownership, the top stack tool, the player projection, boom bust tool, all of that stuff. Matt, I didn't even know. I'm dead serious. I didn't even know we had the game script adjusted rush percentage and pace tool on our site. I'm looking at it now. That's awesome.
It's sick. It's awesome.
It's awesome. We have the tiers, DraftKings tiers, Showdown, everything for Showdown, literally everything. You can get that with the Express Pass too, less than $5 a week. All of our ownership rankings, projections for Showdown. And for a week, you're banging out like 4 Showdown sites, right? Maybe 3. Yeah, but still, there's just so much value in all of this. If you want to get the Awesemo Plus Platinum and you want to get a week for 25% off, And that's not just NFL. That's every sport, right? Everything we have all of these tools for everything made, used, and a lot of money won using these by the number one ranked DFS player out there, Awesemo himself, Alex Baker. You know him. By the way, shout him out. Dude's getting married this weekend. Show him some love on Twitter. Wish him luck, which he will absolutely need. I can attest to that. Use the promo code NFL Strategy Show, all one word, all caps. You go to awesemo.com/join, or it should be at awesemo.com/promos. But whether you want to do a week or you want to make a real investment with a year for just NFL or all sports, a month, all sport, it doesn't matter. Whether you're a serious player, a novice, hobbyist, or professional, we got something for everybody. And now you can get the Fantasy Cruncher add-on, not just for the month of the year, but for the week as well. So a great way to dip your feet in the water and see if it's to your liking. I think you'll enjoy it. Last thing, if you do decide to sign up and join us, get in the premium Slack chat. Take advantage of the office hours where you've got pros answering your questions and helping you refine your game, and hang out with the cool community. So hopefully we'll see you over there. All right, Matt, let's go. We got 3 to go. Around 15 minutes. I think we can do this. Miami and Las Vegas. Tua Tagovailoa is questionable to play. Out. I'm sorry. Tua is out. Tua has been ruled out, which leaves us with Jacoby Brissett. I suppose you could do worse, but not great. And Vegas has played pretty well. How are you approaching this game?
Yeah, this is probably middle of the road or bad. If you're not playing mass multi-entry, you're probably staying away from this game. One thing we do have to mention is that the Las Vegas Raiders defense certainly looks improved over the course of the first 2 games of the season. PFF is really high on them to start the season. They're 6th in team defensive grades. Now, some of the underlying stats don't look quite as impressive. They're 14th in points per play allowed, but they're still bottom tier in passing yards per play allowed, 21st and 26th in yards per carry allowed. So then you're just adjusting for the fact that a Jacoby Brissett-led offense scares nobody. It's going to be low average depth of target. It's going to be run heavy. And so players like Will Fuller and Jalen Waddle get a downgrade for sure. Now, Tua Tagovailoa was not particularly efficient in the first week plus of the season. So we're not completely writing off these players, but I don't think that against the Raiders this season, we're talking about a walk in the park, especially if their quarterback is below what they're used to in efficiency. I don't know. I don't even want Gaskin really, even at 5,400. I know nobody is going to play him. He's at 1.2% projected ownership, and his salary is right in line. His projection is right in line with salary-based expectations. But these are all really thin plays on the Miami side.
For sure. But you know what's going to happen? Will Fuller is going to return and have like 2 bomb touchdowns.
I'd love to see it.
Me too. It's going to happen. We're going to come back next week and talk about it. Like, oh, remember we talked about Will Fuller? Yeah. He's cheap. He can break one. There's always that. But
I'd rather play him than Mike Gesicki. That's for sure.
Yeah. I'd rather play him than Jalen Waddle too, because I don't know if this team's going to have many sustained drives. And Waddle, I think, is more valuable in that sense, where Will Fuller, you're just hoping in tournaments that, you know, the guy can put the afterburners on and break them. Can we please just at least acknowledge that Will Fuller, granted, when you've had somebody like Deshaun Watson as your quarterback, that's pretty helpful. But let's at least acknowledge that Will Fuller, when healthy, is really good with a really high ceiling.
Yeah, you have to Watson adjust all of Fuller's statistics, but we saw Deshaun Watson's stats continually increase when Fuller was on the field versus when he was off.
Yep, no doubt. But yes, absolutely have to adjust it. Even if it was Tua in there, we'd be adjusting it pretty significantly. Mm-hmm. Darren Waller, Henry Ruggs, anybody you like for the Raiders this week?
Yeah, Darren Waller's volume is nothing to scoff at. You didn't see this insane expected fantasy points totals that we saw week 1, but also the Steelers defense was doing everything in their power to stop him. And that might have been a contributor to why they got beat over the top at the end of the game by spending so much attention on the middle of the field where Waller typically thrives. I think we probably do see a bounce back game here. The Awesemo projections are really, really high on Waller, right in line with salary-based expectations. And they're pretty bullish on Carr as well. I mean, he's been playing very well this season, but from a fantasy perspective, he's just playing in line with expectation. The thing is, the volume has increased. He's 4th right now in expected fantasy points per game on this slate, which is really high for a non-rushing quarterback. I'm not concerned about that ankle injury. He played through it, and I believe they already announced him as good to go. And last thing I'll say here, Bryan Edwards has been utilized a ton in the red zone, and they clearly want to get him a touchdown. It's going to happen. I don't know when, but Henry Ruggs getting open deep over the top is what this offense dreamed about. If they can actually consistently do that, then Carr's numbers can stay high for the rest of the season.
I like it. Almost 500 watching us here as we wake our way into the afternoon on the East Coast. 174 likes, not bad. Almost at 200. I'm not underwhelmed by the like totals. I'm not overwhelmed, but I'm whelmed, but I'd like to be overwhelmed by the like totals hitting 200 like now.
Yeah, I'm simply whelmed, but I'm trying to go take the over.
Yes, let's take the over on the whelmed. I like that. By the way, I realized we had 12K views on our matchups breakdown last week. I think that's the highest we've ever done on one of our Thursday breakdown videos, which for a DFS live stream that's this long, that's pretty good stuff, man. Proud of us.
Hey, thank you all you guys for tuning in. Appreciate it so much. And thank you, Jordan, for always being here for the 9 years it takes to make this show.
No doubt. Thanks to all of you 12,000 people that watched as well. Much love. Seattle, Minnesota, 2 games to go. This game's got a monster total. And I was so mad at myself for not just, you know how you talk about getting out of the statistical bubble and all that, Matt? I was so mad at myself for not doing that last week. I will never say go with my gut, but like, I really like that Minnesota-Arizona game and just ended up underweight on it. Like, it sucked because maybe it wouldn't have made a difference because there were a lot of points, but it's not like Thielen or Jefferson were slate breakers, right? So maybe it wouldn't have made a difference anyway. But what I will say is I honestly think that Minnesota is going to be involved in a lot of shootouts this year. And with a mostly concentrated offense, even though KJ Osborne's getting involved, they become interesting. And Seattle's pretty concentrated too. Yeah, we could talk about Freddie Swain, fine. But these are 2 teams that, generally speaking, have a few big playmakers on each side. And my God, if this game ends up going 70 total points, I wouldn't be shocked at all. It's at 56 right now. And both teams have 27 plus point implied totals. Right? God, the conditions on this one are ripe for the picking.
Yeah, this is an awesome game environment. I think no one is going to be passing it up. And, you know, one thing we can say too, for the last couple of weeks, we've had these massive high game totals in the afternoon slate with concentrated offenses. And so what that has created is this swell of available wide receiver ones that are available in the afternoon, which create really, really interesting things for DFS, because what it does is it flattens out the ownership because no one's super overweight on wide receivers like they are on free square running backs. And it also creates great pivot points because you can always go to those auxiliary options from those wide receiver ones. We're seeing the same thing with these 2 teams. Yes, I know KJ Osborne has been much more heavily involved on the Minnesota side compared to that super concentrated offense last year. But the first thing I want to mention in this matchup is that Tyler Lockett is now higher, just slightly, in salary than DK Metcalf. And that is something that is not typically true. I understand it, but part of me, just because I'm, looking at the salaries from week to week and a little bit more long-term, even dating back to last season, DK Metcalf might just be a value simply because he's the second wide receiver in salary on DraftKings this week. I like both these plays, and Minnesota's defense does not scare us at all. So game stack away with both players. You know me, not a big Tyler Lockett fan, and season long so far, I look like an idiot because first 2 games are insane. But he has a history throughout his entire career of being pretty volatile from week to week where you like consistency. But in DFS, I mean, my God, this guy is just, when he goes off, he goes off. But DK Metcalf he's targeted double-digit times last game. It's not like he isn't involved, just hasn't had that huge game yet. When that huge game happens, I'd like to be there for it.
But I will say the field is not exactly forgetting about DK Metcalf either. Last I looked, he's still getting some owners. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he's maybe is he further down? No, he's got to be
wide receiver 10. I have a 10.5% ownership.
Okay,
a little bit less than Lockett. See, I think just from a game theory standpoint, I just want the lower owned one that's usually higher salary, which means
sure,
no
doubt. What I will say though, ownership's very flat this week.
Mm-hmm.
Like not just on this team in general, ownership is very, very flat. You have one guy, Cooper Kupp, and we're going to turn there right now, getting around 24%. Aside from that, you have like 20 players that are in between 10 and 17% and nobody above that outside of Kupp. So,
okay, that's a great point we should make, because when there are weeks like that, we have super flat ownership, eating the chalk means something different than it does in other weeks. Because what I was saying is you have more freedom to eat more chalk in a week like this, because other people will be going to that other 10% owned player more often than when we see high concentration at the top.
No doubt about it. I'm less worried about it this week for sure. But I can tell you, actually, do you want to hit on Minnesota quickly so we can close it out with Tampa, LA?
Yeah, I'm not concerned about them limiting Dalvin Cook. If he's out there, he's getting a full workload. I think Mike Zimmer had a quote that is music to the ears of anyone who is rostering Dalvin. He says, he makes us go. They're not going to move away from this run-focused offense. They're currently 7th in game-adjusted rush rate. So we're relying on a concentrated passing offense that hasn't actually occurred so far this year. Yes, Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen got in the end zone last week, but they are slightly thinner plays than they were last season. Don't panic. Jefferson is 12th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points, and Thielen is right behind him at 19. But KJ Osborne, the real story here, he's averaging almost 10 expected fantasy points per game. And obviously when you break a long one like he did last week, you're going to be over expected in terms of your efficiency so far. I'm not concerned long-term. I think we still see plenty of looks for Thielen and Jefferson. This is a great game environment. If you can fit them into your lineups, they're fantastic plays. And what's really nice is that I'm only seeing 8% ownership for Jefferson. That's 15th among wide receivers. Do you think Thielen has one of his patented 2 touchdown games? 6.4% ownership. Those are pretty darn good players at low ownership. Those are usually good bets.
I would agree. And it also doesn't hurt that Thielen at 6,700 has actually seen his price come down $400 since last game. So I'm on board. I'm on board with this entire game. I love it. And if you're on board with playing Showdown tonight, first of all, check out the strategy show. Matt Kajeski and I do it every Monday, every single Thursday. It already recorded 9 a.m. Eastern every Monday and Thursday. And then you got the deeper dive and live before lock taking you up till kickoff tonight. The reason I mention this though is because the MLB Top Stack tool is free at Awesemo if you want to check that out. But NFL Showdown ownership projections are free to everyone today. If you wanted to get a look at them for the Showdown slate, take advantage of it if you aren't behind the paywall and if you aren't a premium sub yet. All right, Matt, let's close it out. We've made pretty good time. Tampa Bay, LA, dude, 55-point total, 1-point spread. The Rams getting 1 point at home. This could be an electric game for the Rams passing game because I do think whether it's Henderson or Sony Michel that they are going to struggle to run the football. Yes, I have that much respect for this front seven for Tampa. I think they are that good at limiting opposing run games. Maybe they'll soften up a little bit to prevent Matthew Stafford from going crazy, but Cooper Kupp's been fantastic. Now that he's a legitimate deep threat, he's just amazing. He's 37% of the team's air yards. I love it. But I am not getting away from Robert Woods or Tyler Higbee this week. I mean, Woods went from playing 78% of the snaps to almost every snap last week. He's still a good player. Tyler Higbee he's played 100% of snaps and he's running like 27 routes per game, which is fine at his position. All in all, I love the passing offense here. I'm not really impressed with Tampa's secondary thus far. And I think this Stafford run or led offense could be pretty prolific this season. So I'm all in, baby, especially on the ones that aren't nearly as nearly as high ownership as Cooper Kupp.
Yeah. And we have to say, you heard it here first, us all week last week talking about if this is the new Cooper Kupp, then he's a legitimate wide receiver 1 overall candidate, and so far so good on that call. Obviously, he's not going to score 32 points every single week like he did last week, but just the amount of volume he's getting both through air yards and targets, really, really different this year. In terms of this matchup, though, super high total, fantastic offenses on both sides of the ball. But I think there is a lot more volatility in what the actual total of this game will be than the implied totals let on.
Because of these defenses?
Because of the quality of the defenses. We already talked earlier in this podcast about how a couple bounces of the balls, a couple deflections here or there can change the entire course, the environment of a game. And both of these defenses are just full of playmakers, really, against the pass and the rush. What I'm saying is they are probably up for the challenge, which makes the volatility of this high game total a little bit concerning. I'm not saying there isn't like 90, 80 point upside in this game. The offenses are just electric, as you said, but the Rams are number 2 in PFF's coverage grade. Tampa Bay is number 3. These are both top 10 defenses in overall grade. The Rams are number 1. Tampa's all the way down at 5. And the rush defense, as you already said, for Tampa Bay is strong year in and year out. They're actually 11th in PFF grades. I think that's just variance at this point. Still, concentrated, high pass volume offenses with a high game total is not something we're going to shy away from, especially if we can fit them into cash game lineups. Mike Evans, especially at 5% ownership, he looks like a strong play, even though he's getting Jalen Ramsey. I know Chris Godwin is popping in all the optimal lineup percentages. You're not going to be alone with that one. He's coming in at 15% projected ownership. And then what do you got to say? I mean, maybe Gronk is just Gronk again. It could be. I mean, you know, he's number 3 in expected fantasy points, tied at least right now. And you said he was second right now?
Second.
So maybe, yeah.
Yeah. And Antonio Brown looks like he's not going to play.
I get it. He's tight end 3 in salary. It feels like a fish play, even at 5,500, but I don't know. 2% projected ownership. That is Gronk playing consistently well and not garnering any attention from the fantasy community. It's a great illustration of how the DFS community has evolved, because no one is point chasing, but maybe we should be.
Maybe we should. Anyway, we got to go. Jordan Klein's got work to do. Matt can be followed and found at Draftaholic. And as our boy on Twitter pointed out, Tyreek Miller, Matt should get on Cameo, right? On the Cameo app and start doing singing cameos for all of his biggest fans. That would be fun. Follow me at Laffy_D, Awesemo at Awesemo_com. Again, shout out our boy Jordan Klein in chat. And thank you. Over 200 likes. Boom. We made it to the big times, baby. We'll see you back here soon. Check us out tonight and all of the other shows coming up on the channel. Directly after this, we've got nothing maybe. Oh, yeah, we do. We got the Awesemo betting show on the Awesemo Odds channel. Check it out, man. These guys are awesome. It'll be Ben Rasa, Eitan Shander, and then so much more throughout the day. We'll catch you back here soon, everybody. Peace.